I'm Indy and welcome to another exciting episode of Out of the Trenches, where I sit here in the chair of wisdom and answer your questions about the First World War. William Ford writes, Indy. William. With the space and room to maneuver on the Eastern Front, did cavalry play a major role? If so, which nation exploited it the most and to what extent? P.S. Thanks for being awesome. You hear that, guys? I'm awesome. Okay, well, William. With the room to maneuver and a less coherent, less entrenched front line, yeah, you had more possibilities for cavalry engagements than on the Western Front, sure. When the war was mobile, the speed and reliability of horses was used to quickly scout for the enemy, push through gaps, or exploit open flanks. Both sides would use mounted troops to surprise the enemy or occupy positions before the infantry arrived, which was crucial, for example, during the Battle of Tannenberg. Cavalry was also essential for transport and movement in general. Not only was the vast countryside of Eastern Europe totally different than, say, France, the Russians also used a different railway gauge. I digress. But the primary means of travel and transport was the horse. As the Austrians prepared to fight the Russian army, a third of their force was made up of cavalry. And the first initial attacks with mounted soldiers were effective, but costly, losing up to 60% of their strength right at the beginning. But the Russians had their own counterpart to the Uhlans, Hussars, and Dragoons of their adversaries, the Cossacks. Now, they were the barbarian hordes of Russia and traditionally feared by the Prussians. At the beginning of the war, the British even put out a rumor that they would send the horde to the Western Front. The Cossacks from the south and southeast of Russia were traditionally nomadic people, but many lived in their own territory and enjoyed some privileges of autonomy for giving the oath that they would fight for Russia in wartime. Cossacks were vicious fighters, and just calling out their name could start a panic in the enemy. But just like on the Western Front, they were not a match for entrenched machine guns. Instead, they would attack stragglers or artillery and supply columns that got separated or lost. They were most deadly when attacking a retreating enemy in the rear, as you can see in the first stage of the Brusilov offensive. Cavalry attacks were still a thing in the Great War, machine guns or no machine guns. And just the rumor that cavalry had broken through the ranks could send whole regiments into disarray. But we will talk more about this, more about cavalry, in our regular episodes. Ezra Bristow writes on Facebook, Hi Indy and team, great war. Have heard stories of Russian and German troops signing an armistice to deal with super packs of wolves that were preying on troops on both sides. Is this true? And how much in the way of recorded material do we have on this event? Loving the show, and as soon as my next paycheck arrives, I'm adding you to my Patreon account. All right, cool. Ezra, it was certainly a time when packs of wolves roamed more freely than now through the wide expanses of Eastern Europe and Russia. It was less of an event and more of a phenomenon that recurred throughout the war during winter months. Since the movement of men disturbed their usual hunting grounds, they accompanied the advances and camping grounds of the armies like hungry shadows. You do have some horror stories from the Carpathian battleground where wolves would feast upon the wounded soldiers in the icy mountain regions. True. Around Minsk, where the German and Russian armies faced each other throughout the winter of 1916 and 1917, the wolves were deprived of their usual game, and when their hunger became stronger, when it became extreme, it became stronger than their fear of humans, they would become bold. They would fall on terrified sentries during the night, creep around the camps, and even attack whole groups of surprised soldiers in packs. I'm not sure about an armistice, though. Fighting in winter times was reduced to a minimum already. It seems logical, though, that you wouldn't send out small skirmishing parties if a pack of hungry wolves was out there looking for anything meaty. Now, sources on this are rare, and often the tales men tell each other were exaggerated due to all the rumors those incidents would create. Suddenly, there were wolves everywhere, in every shadow. But it is pretty safe to say that those attacks did happen. We have accounts of the same thing from the Second World War as well, where and when the circumstances were very similar. James from the Patreon Hangout writes, do you know much about the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, such as their inception, their role pre-World War I, during World War I, and post-World War I? I haven't found many good resources, but this is a part of my family history and it would be interesting to know more. Well, the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders were formed back in 1793 as the 79th Line Infantry Regiment, raised by Sir Alan Cameron of Erracht to serve in the Flanders Campaign, which you can look up yourself. I'm not going to go into it now. Over the years, the regiment fought at Salamanca, Waterloo, Balaclava, and in the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. But ironically for us, they would return to Flanders to fight in the Great War, from where they started. Right from the beginning of the war, the 1st Battalion of the Cameron Highlanders was shipped to France, August 14th, 1914, with the British Expeditionary Force, and fought in the Battle of the Mons, the Battle of the Marne, and the First Battle of Ypres. From Loos to the Somme and Lys, they were in battle after battle. The 2nd Battalion joined the fighting in France in December 1914, but was sent to Salonika at the end of 1915 and took part in the major battles down there until the surrender of Bulgaria. They went on to be stationed in Constantinople until 1919. The 3rd Battalion was stationed in Ireland. The other battalions were part of Kitchener's New Army or part of the Territorial Force. By the end of the war, 10 battle honors were displayed on the regimental colors, showing all the major engagements of the British Army. They lost 5,930 men, who were mostly recruited from northern Scotland and the Western Isles, and were awarded 3 Victorian Crosses. If you would also like to be able to live chat with us once in a while, support us on Patreon. And if you'd like to learn more about the Salonika front, you can click here to check that out. And definitely like us on Facebook. See you next time.